Welcome to Disrupted Science, the occasional conversation between the authors of the upcoming book, How the Internet Disrupted Science. I'm Kent Anderson, here with my co-author, Joy Moore, and we're recording this on Wednesday, October 15th, 2025. Hey, Joy.
Hey, Kent. How's it going?
It's going great, as usual. We're so busy, I can't even tell you. It's crazy.
Yeah, and then we've survived the nor'easter up and down the
Up
entire
and down the
eastern
coast.
seaboard.
Yeah,
Yeah,
that was
yeah.
ugly. I got leaves to pick up now, so. But yeah, so we're actually going to be featuring an interview this week. So it's not just you and me talking this week. It's we've got some really great interviews coming up. So and here's another great one, I think. So
No, we're super lucky to have had the opportunity to chat with Seth Leopold the other day.
yeah,
And so this is a pre-recorded interview, and we've had some time to kind of reflect on what we talked about with him, and why we wanted to talk to him. We really enjoy learning about how people who are working in scientific publishing on a day-to-day basis are dealing with a lot of the things that we're observing from a bit of a stance back, right?
right. A step
Um,
remove. Yeah.
yeah, step remove. And so we got into some discussions about what it's like to deal with preprints, what it's like to deal with AI,
Mm-hmm.
how it is working with a community, and things that are probably common to a lot of other journals. But when you look across the spectrum from basic research all the way to clinical practice, and then into something as practical as surgery, we can see common themes running through. So it was really, really wonderful to get Seth's point of view, and we're very fortunate that he took time to chat with us.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I got to know Seth through some projects, and he and I and another editor actually wrote a paper about preprints and how letting those go out into the biomedical space, especially, kind of didn't live up to what we call the duty of care. That was the framing element for that article, and then just seeing what these people deal with on a daily basis and the challenges they face, and he'll talk about how they're having to scale technology to fight technology now. And it's an arms race that really doesn't have an end unless you stop it, nip it in the bud, I think. But yeah, a great conversation. And what was interesting is I think it comes up in the interview that my knee is an issue. So it's bringing me to orthopedic surgeons. And
Mhm.
so since the recording of this, I had a checkup, and Seth gave a little advice, and I shared that with the orthopedic surgeon, and he said, "Yeah, he's right." So it's nice to see the level of evidence, the evidence being shared across the country, because Seth's in Seattle and this guy's in Massachusetts. And he said, "Yeah, he's right, and so this is what we're going to do." And so that was nice to see that people still abide by best evidence, and science still kind of gets you to the point where you can get uniform treatment about these things. But yeah, great interview. And this is a guy who cares a lot about what he does. And so it's great to feel that too. And he's very careful about evaluating papers, working with authors, and evaluating issues in scientific publishing. So here comes the interview. So, hi, Seth.
Hello, Kent.
Hey, Seth, nice to meet you.
Hello, Joy. Pleasure is mine. Thanks for having me.
So we wanted to start off with just kind of orienting people because, as you like to joke, orthopedic surgery is a non-cognitive discipline. Um, and I would disagree, and I know orthopedic surgeons would, but orthopedic surgery has a lot of relevance today because you have an older population, you have a lot of people playing pickleball, and being active into their later stages of life and wanting to be active. And so can you just in general describe the field and kind of the ratio of researchers to practitioners and related disciplines and how they have a bearing on it? Because I know you have an interest in bringing in, things that like translational science into.
Yeah, you bet. Thanks, Ken. So orthopedic surgery is one of the larger subspecialties. So, it would be smaller than the main branch specialties like internal medicine or general surgery, but it'd be larger than most of the other subspecialties like, gastroenterology or cardiology, just for a sense of scale. Um, from what I could see, something in the low 20,000 range board certified orthopedic surgeons in the United States. I think the American Academy has about 35,000-ish. I could be off by some. It's about 10-to-1 ratio of men to women, which makes it one of the most lopsided specialties from that standpoint, although that's slowly changing. The large majority are either subspecialists or generalists with a subspecialty interest. And by subspecialties, I'm really meaning subspecialties. So pediatric orthopedics or musculoskeletal tumor or joint replacement. As far as the science part that you asked about 85% practice outside of academia. So like on the micro scale in our department, which is a large department with a national reputation, there's about 85% surgeons and 15% PhD scientists. That'd be probably a high-end example. On the macro scale, and this is from before the current presidential administration, about 4% of academic orthopedic surgeons have NIH funding, which is one benchmark you could look at, which means something in the low 100s in terms of like R01 grants. So most of the research in our specialty is self-funded or intramurally funded. But despite that, and I thought, you would find this sort of interesting, or I think you will. Last year, Clarivate, which is the impact factor people, as you know, indexed almost 140 orthopedic journals. Cymago indexed over 300. And I don't think I've read 140 practice-changing articles or even 300 that I'd call very good in my whole life. And so the idea that there are 300 and something journals putting out issues every month, let's say, or every couple months, it gets to the point that I know that Kent has written about, and I think your book is to some degree about this, which is, what you talk about flooding the zone, or what I sometimes write about as a signal to noise ratio problem. And maybe this is something to talk about later today. As far as what the specialty does and how it's changed, I think you asked me about that, was, there's been some good discoveries during my professional career, some real, life-changing ones. When I started, and this would have been for sense of scope and scale, let's say the 1990s, the clinics used to be full of patients with rheumatoid arthritis and inflammatory arthritis with profound deformities of the large joints in the hands and feet, and they would be in wheelchairs and couldn't walk and couldn't do simple daily activities because of this. And those conditions have, if not been cured, they've been tamed. And so that, we don't really find ourselves doing those big reconstructions anymore. I guess that's more of a rheumatology kind of discovery than an orthopedic one, but it's definitely changed the field. As far as orthopedic discovery, bearing surfaces have improved in quality, probably by an order of magnitude. And bearing surfaces here, I'm talking about the things that work inside of a knee replacement or a hip replacement or a shoulder replacement. So they're way more durable than they used to be. We used to find ourselves redoing joint replacements when they would wear out. And that would be a big part of any reconstructive practice. And those kinds of operations have almost, gone to zero. Another big change has been post-op pain is managed a lot more efficiently now, so that operations that would keep somebody in the hospital a week when I first arrived at the hospital where I now practice are now done as either outpatients or overnight stays. So there have been some big changes. On the flip side, and this is something I know both of you care about, is what happens with evidence and how slow it is to incorporate the best evidence into practice. Before we began today, you were talking a little bit about I won't betray HIPAA, somebody who has a meniscus tear, and that person
It's me.
is somewhere
I'll take it.
in the midst of middle adulthood, and so that that's a diagnosis that we've got lots of randomized trials showing that's a diagnosis that shouldn't get operated on in patients in middle adulthood and beyond, and yet it's still one of the most common operations that orthopedic surgeons perform. And so the time from best evidence discovery to incorporation of practice isn't months or years. It's sort of like decades or generations.
Right. So in a practitioner heavy market where there's, and especially a procedure based market, how does how do new findings get socialized and distilled and accepted?
Yeah, right. That's a huge challenge, and it's slow. The example I just gave is
Hmm.
one where, I think very few people can read what we know about that diagnosis, and it's far from the only one. There are several operations in the 10 most commonly performed operations by orthopedic surgeons that have randomized trials showing them to be ineffective or no more effective than placebo surgery that are still, like I say, among the 10 most common.
Hmm.
So, one answer to your good question is, sometimes they don't get socialized adequately or in any reasonable time scale.
Hmm.
Um, I would say sometimes the hand gets forced. When some of the trials about meniscus tears in middle adulthood came out, insurance companies decided they weren't going to pay for them, and that sort of forces changes to practice.
Hmm.
I'd like to think that as a profession, we shouldn't need those sorts of outside influences to generate those kinds of changes. But as you and I have talked about on past projects that we've done, journals are part of the problem. So, I'm guilty in the sense that I edit and spend a lot of my time creating a product that doesn't really meet the needs of that 85% we talked about earlier who practice outside of academia. They get their information other ways
Hmm.
than journals. And that's not because it's not because there's something wrong with them. Their practice needs are different. Um, and journals don't really meet their needs, the need for sort of pace and ease of consumption. Brevity certainly
Hmm.
is
Right.
a quality that we don't always have in good supply in journals.
Right.
But at the same time, I think there is some obligation for everybody to engage with, what I'd call the best available evidence or good quality evidence.
Yep. Yep. Yeah, and I mean, so speaking of quality of evidence and what it takes to make that, I know one of the things that you and your team are proudest of is that you're collaborators with authors who submit papers. You work with them to make the most of their findings, if their findings are worth taking forward, and sorting things out and all of that, and bringing the best evidence forward. So, can you talk a little bit about that compared to, I mean, there's kind of a reputation that, peer review is, punishing and cruel and a, harsh and terrible thing to go through, and editors are mean and all of that. But, I think that my experience has been that editors are, you know, when the researchers are serious and when they have a good finding, the editors can be your best friend too. So,
Well, they say, the opposite of a great truth is also a great truth. And so yes, we try to do all of those good things, and yes, it can sometimes be punishing and hard. I don't mean it for it to be punishing, but it's certainly a sweaty process, both for the editors involved, but probably, more so for the authors if the editors are asking what editors ought to be asking for, which is really good clarity. If somebody's coming to us with a discovery they feel is important, and we agree and the reviewers agree, then let's also agree that anything that's that important is too important to risk being misunderstood, or not conveyed adequately. And so, since most of us don't write for a living, and not everybody is aware of, what are considered normative standards for scholarly publishing, because even the busiest authors are only doing it a few times a year. That's where a good professional editor comes in to sort of help that person to get there. I guess, would break the process down into something of a two-step, where the first part is necessarily at a selective journal, a journal that cares about its readers, enough to curate. The first step is that of arbiter or judge. We have to decide what we think is important for the people who read our journal, and that involves culling a large part of the herd. For us, it's almost 90%.
mhm.
But then once that step is done, I think a good editor flips a switch and goes from arbiter or judge to mentor and coach and cheerleader, partner, in a sense. How can we're now on the same team. We're trying to take this important idea and make it as clear as we can make it, make it as digestible as we can make it. And then how can we work sometimes together, sometimes individually, to amplify it and disseminate it and get it into the hands of the people who can, do something good with it, which is to take it into an exam room somewhere.
Yeah. Yeah. So one of the things that you and I have written about and bonded over is the worry that we have about preprinting, especially in biomedical sciences, and posting those for public consumption. And you spearheaded a initiative in orthopedic surgery to create a policy to prevent that, to prevent preprinted papers being considered for publication. Can you talk about how that came to be and where it is right now?
Yeah, sure. It's a topic that is important to me because I think it's one of the several ways that scholarly publishing has taken a wrong turn during my time in this role. I've been in this role about 13 years, and we've done some things pretty well and some things less well. I think the creation or the adoption of preprints in biomedical research has not been a plus. For me, by about 2018 or so, I had concerns that really began to nag at me in a serious way. When it started to look like they were going to jump lanes from things like math and physics into clinical medicine. So I took my concerns to the editorial board, the senior editors of our journal, and when we workshopped it, everybody sort of was on the same page that this seemed troubling. So I sent basically a broadcast into the blind. I wrote a Dear Sir, Ma'am letter to the inbox at medRxiv, which was the medical preprint server that was just then starting up, I think.
Right.
And I was gratified to get a nice personal response from a guy called Joe Ross. I don't know whether he's still connected with them. I don't follow it closely. It was copied to Harlan Krumholtz and a Ginger Gamble, people who I hadn't, at that point met or knew about. I asked them in my email, could we have a visit or a phone call? Would they like to come to Philadelphia? Because I think they were in Connecticut. They were somewhere around there. Would they like to come to a meeting of ours and talk about the things that were concerning us, or join us by speakerphone, which is eventually what Dr. Ross did. And I really wanted this to be just as fair as possible. I figured, since this was new to me and there were these smart guys at Yale doing it, that I was really missing something. They were very enthused. They had a real sense of, I don't know what else to say. I think a word you use is utopianism about it
Right.
that didn't sort of register with me. But I figured, like I said, I'm a mallet swinging, lunch pail carrying kind of guy. I was pretty sure I was missing it. And so I sent them the questions that we had. I said, these are our questions. These are our only questions. We will not deviate from this script, but this is what we'd like to talk about. I didn't want to play gotcha with anybody. I wasn't behaving as a journalist. I was behaving as somebody who was ignorant about a new tool.
Mm-hmm.
And I wanted to just be, to learn. So Dr. Ross joined us, answered our questions. I asked him if I could send him a round of follow-up questions by email so that he wouldn't feel under any time pressure to answer in the moment. And he said, of course, and we did. And, suffice it to say, it didn't allay our concerns. And I began to realize that maybe I wasn't missing something, but that this thing had sort of problematical elements that would be different in clinical medicine than they might be in mathematics or physics, let's say. And I don't know enough about those specialties to be dangerous, so don't ask me about them. But for clinical medicine, there were things that troubled me. The main concerns that we came around to editorializing about in 2019, after I brought these concerns not just to our ed board, but at that point I contacted the editorial boards of the two other leading general interest clinical orthopedic journals, And what I saw is the leading research orthopedic journal. And I said, hey, this is on my mind. We had this meeting. Here were the notes from the meeting. Here's what we learned. Are you seeing it differently? I'm pretty sure I'm still missing something, but maybe I'm not. But we are thinking that we don't want any part of this. We don't want to be publishing papers that have been pre-printed. What do you see? And we got together and eventually editorialized about the shared concerns of these four leading general interest journals. I mean, the concerns, which won't come as any surprise to you, Kent, or probably to your readers, but this was 2019, so for medicine, this was new. Um, we saw this as preprints as a tool that was serving the wrong audience. It was a tool that could allow researchers to cut corners and get sort of the fruits of a publication without going through the vetting, or the truth-seeking activity that we consider peer review. And we're not saying peer review is perfect, and we can talk about the difference between perfect and a truth-seeking activity, if you like. But I think there are differences, but both of those things are better than nothing. And so by doing that, they were serving the wrong audience, right? They're serving authors and not readers, which is what we think is important in a journal that curates. We thought it was unlikely that the kind of post-publication peer review that might take place in, let's say, mathematics or physics was going to take place in medicine. And indeed, it hasn't and doesn't. We were worried about things like version confusion and error. There's no responsible party to make sure that the version of record is reflected in any preprint. And the main advantages of preprints, and this is pre-COVID, remember,
Right.
was that the pace of dissemination wasn't so important in medicine to justify, what we saw as serious risks of error. And even in COVID, I don't think it was justified for the most part. So those four journals got together and agreed not to accept papers that were pre-printed. And we agreed that if we discovered that they posted to a preprint server after it was submitted for review, that we would remove it from review. And if it was posted to a preprint server subsequent to publication, we would retract it. And again, this is pre-COVID. And pretty much all of those things have come to pass. I think that, they have, to use your phrase, contributed to the flooding of the zone, or the worsening of the signal to noise problem that clinicians have to face when deciding what evidence to incorporate. It's been used in purposefully unscrupulous ways at times, although I don't think that's the biggest problem. It is a problem. There's all kinds of version confusion.
Yeah. And is orthopedics generally, do you think it has, people have abided by that?
Well, we screen, and I surmise that, although I don't know for a fact that the other journals do, but, the nice thing about the tools that we use at the front door is that if a paper has been published to a preprint server, it'll basically come up as 100% duplicate. It'll look like a duplicate publication to our editorial assistant. She just puts a flag on it and sends it to me. And if I can identify that it is the same paper, or substantially the same paper, same data set, and it's human subjects research, then that's a desk rejection for us. And the fact is, even for laboratory research, we just don't find it worth it to invest in papers that have been pre-printed, even for laboratory research. And almost all of those are, all that I can remember in recent memory have also been desk rejections. I just don't want to traffic with that, as an editor. And I've sort of made my position clear enough, through that editorial with the other journals, a subsequent editorial in 2021 that kind of looked back on what had happened in the early pandemic, and still justifying that it's just not necessary, it's not helpful, it's harmful. And then, I've done some other things, as you mentioned earlier, we've done some writing together on this in other venues. I've done a little bit to try to get the attention of the lay audience with, in terms of like an op-ed in a big city newspaper kind of thing.
Right. Yep.
Yeah, I was thinking about your core audience, your readership of your journal.
Yeah.
Busy orthopedic surgeons, you're publishing a small amount of material for a large amount of people. And what are the odds that somebody who's practicing in orthopedics wants to go mining the literature in preprint servers to maybe find something that is not presented to them specifically through a journal like yours? What's
Yeah, we
I,
had to unpack. Go ahead, finish. I'm sorry. I thought you were through.
yeah, no, I mean, my question is, what is the potential counter argument for why preprints would make sense in a subject area like yours?
Well, I do not believe that somebody is sitting in the office with a middle-aged adult with a meniscus tear and is going to try to decide whether to do an arthroscopic debridement by doing a PubMed search in front of that patient in real time in that room and discover that there are 12 randomized trials in good journals, but there's this preprint that says it's really all right to do this, despite the 12
Mhm.
vetted trials, and they're going to change their practice on that. That's not a realistic use case for preprints. I think that they would certainly come up on the lit search of a trialist who's beginning a project.
Mhm.
Um, and he or she might see and use findings that were in a preprint, or might be tempted to. It could be categorized among what some people call the gray literature when somebody is doing a meta-analysis or a systematic review, and then that author has to decide how or whether to incorporate that information in his or her
Mhm.
systematic review. So those are the more common ways that that material would get used. I don't think that most people, well, first of all, I'm not sure how many people read journals at all, period, including journals that curate, including good ones like New England Journal of Medicine and JAMA, or,
Right.
I flatter myself, our journal or the other leading journals of our specialty. I don't know that people, sort of read them the way that, I was in bed reading a good novel last night. I don't know that that's how people are consuming anymore, even academic people, maybe some, but maybe not too many. And so I certainly don't think people are reading open access journals that way, and they're definitely not reading preprints that way. You'd have to be the worst kind of insomniac to decide I'm going to go to MedArchive at bedtime and see what's new today in orthopedic surgery.
It
So
would cure you, though. It would cure
it
you.
would cure the insomnia. Then again, so my editorials. But
And
so, th- so
I think
so
that's one of the most common misconceptions now that journals are getting a lot more attention within the public sphere,
yeah.
is that these are things that people read cover to cover. We were talking a couple months ago about the some tech guys who created a new product because they were interested in science but didn't have enough time to read scientific papers.
Mhm.
It's
Yeah,
like, well, nobody nobody really does. The
right.
purpose of journals isn't to give you bedtime reading, it's to ratify new claims or new discoveries
Right.
for people who need to apply that knowledge in their daily practice.
Yeah.
Right. Or that any
Uh,
single paper is, you're going to hang your hat, your coat, your car, your house
right.
on it and just
Right.
be, okay, I got one preprint
Yeah.
and that's great. I'm going to now change my
I'm going to
entire
go
life.
do that. Right. Yeah. It's I want to be fair to your question though, Joy. What you asked what the counter argument would be. The counter arguments are that, the pace of dissemination is too slow in a conventional peer-reviewed journal. And another contention is that if you've got an idea that cuts against the grain, it may not get a fair shake.
Mhm.
Um, so those I think are probably the two most compelling arguments, and we can talk about each of them. I think another is the question of positive outcome bias, or publication bias. Do journals have a preference on that? And that's something we can talk about if you like. But so those are some things that I think advocates would say are advantages. I think those claims don't hold water. If we look carefully at them, and we can talk about that if you want. But maybe you'd be better served to have a preprint advocate on the show. But than to have me try to do justice to their arguments. But I think those are probably the best counter arguments to our viewpoint. But
Mhm.
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
don't
But
believe
even
that
in
they hold
COVID,
water.
they didn't really hold water. I mean,
I
when
don't
you
think
look
that they
back
did.
at it. Yeah.
I don't think that they did. No.
So one of the things that, this almost seems wise in maybe an unexpected way, because now we have this promulgation of LLMs and AI systems that are consuming a lot of preprint text because it's free and it's
Right.
available, and for
Right.
medRxiv and bioRxiv is
Right.
explicitly being consumed by Chan Zuckerberg Initiative and
Right.
their uh, AI initiatives. So, it seems that that was probably prudent, because who knows how the information would be chopped up and served up in a tokenized system like that. But you've also been facing some challenges from AI writers and authors yourself. And can you talk a little bit about those?
We can, but I was actually hoping to ask you guys a question before we leave the other topic.
Yeah, of course.
And you can use my favorite detective show line, which is, "We ask the questions here." You can be the detectives, and I can be the suspect if you don't like my question. But
I'll just turn on my heel and say, one last question, Seth.
exactly, it's a good detective show trope too.
Yeah.
You both have had long careers in scholarly publishing, certainly longer than my own. I was pretty sure that our approach, amongst the leading journals of orthopedics on preprints, which is to say not to engage with them, to not accept papers that use them, would have been picked up by more subspecialties, and it wasn't. I've got my own heresies as to why that might be, but I was curious for your perspectives on that.
Why more subspecialties haven't
Yeah.
rejected
Yeah.
the
Well, I mean, you had the Annals editor on the other week, or
Mhm.
Annals, right?
Annals? Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, and
Annals
she
and
was
Journal of
brilliant.
Medicine.
I mean, if anybody is listening to this podcast, they should, maybe stop listening to me and go listen to that editor, because she's got game, and that was a wonderful interview. And I was sort of had my fingers crossed that you were going to ask her about that. But like, why are they trafficking with this stuff?
Well, I can only speculate, but from what I've heard, there are a couple of reasons, some selfish and some, I think, misinformed. So I think people think they're either harmless or positive. Um, I think they've been convinced of that by endless years of rhetoric about open access and more information is better, and denigration of editors and denegations of peer review and slowness and all of that. So I think that has eroded that or formed a lot of opened a lot of field for the preprint advocates. And then the other reason I've heard, which I found even more troublesome, is that editors, and it's actually been operationalized a couple of times, they like to troll the preprint servers to find papers. And so it's a way for editors to find papers to meet their quotas. And as the transactional model of open access forces editors to accept a certain number of papers, if they have kind of, a wholesale, uh, grab all of papers that they can go and email somebody and say, hey, can you submit to us? I need a couple more papers this month. And the preprint servers fill
Yeah,
that
I
role.
can see that for journals that have to move the meat because they get paid by the piece. I have a harder time seeing that for Annals or
Mhm.
New England Journal or JAMA that have sort of mealy-mouthed, in my opinion, policies on this stuff.
Mhm.
Yeah, I think it is just that they think it's harmless, and
Okay.
and they think it's convenient. I heard from an editor at Science, like, well, preprints have worked for us. We've been able to find some really good papers out of there, and that was at Science. So,
That's so hard for me to believe. Okay, thanks. Well, that's
What?
what I wanted to know.
I
well,
was
Joy, but
Joy? Yeah, I want to hear what Joy has to say too.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I have a slightly different take. I agree with you, Kent, that most think that they're either harmless or positive. Most of my publishing experience has been with society-owned journals, community-based journals, and there's a lot of competition there. They want to maintain their memberships. They want to keep their board members happy. They have new people coming in every few years, in terms of the governance and the strategies for the publications. And I think there's definitely a FOMO, fear of missing out.
Hmm.
If we decide not to do it, but our competitor society does, then we're going to be missing the boat.
Hmm.
And I think that that's probably part of it. And it's also Kent and I get to see a lot of the negative effects of preprints, and kind of reckless open access publishing because we're looking
Yeah.
from the outside in. But probably a lot of the editors and publication committees for societies aren't. They're only looking at their own community, and not seeing the wider problem, that they are contributing to.
Yeah, this is, I really appreciate you sharing that perspective with me, Joy. And Kent. It certainly seems to be some element of red pilling or blue pilling. I can never remember which pill is the bad one. But goodness,
Yeah.
I hope you can find somebody to go on your podcast, tie him or her to a chair, and talk some sense into them. Because it would be, I think the world would be a somewhat better place if more journals adopted this approach. And it did help, I think, that if we get the 3 or 4 journals that are at the top of the pyramid to set the market in this way, to take some of that pressure, that FOMO out, I think.
Mhm.
Well, I think one of the other things to Joy's point, which well, all of her points were really good, but one is I don't think people even know that there
A
is a
problem.
specialty. No, the
Oh,
specialty that has established policies that have said we're not going to consider preprints.
now you've got 2 reasons
And
to get somebody on your show and tie them to a chair.
but when I've mentioned it to people, and you're not the only one. I mean, I think mechanical engineering and civil engineering don't allow them, and there are other, and the standards groups are very careful about how their information flows go because standards have to be singular, and
Right.
so it's I just don't think people they just have kind of gone with the flow, thinking
Hmm.
that that was the way to do it, and so I think
Yeah.
they're surprised when they hear some areas of biomedicine have said no, and some other areas of science have said no,
Yeah.
and just like they're surprised when they find out that some databases charge subscription prices. It's like you have to
Right.
pay for
Right.
data. Yeah, wait till Flybase loses all its government funding, then you'll find out who's paying for what. But
Yeah. Huh. Okay. You had asked
yeah.
earlier about the AI LLM thing. I don't know what the time is here, what you want to
Yeah,
do,
yeah,
but
yeah. So that's probably been one of the bigger surprises, I think, for a lot of editors and and the whole ecosystem has been shocked by the amount of AI slop streaming in. So
yeah.
but you have kind of your own experience with that, right?
Well, again, there as well, I tried to get with the other leading journals of our specialty, and we were able to editorialize at the beginning, the very toe of the learning curve of that, with some standards that eventually became the standards that other entities adopted. They were sort of common sense standards, that a machine can't be an author, for example, and if you're going to use a machine, you have to tell us how you use the machine, and sort of ground level stuff.
Mm-hmm.
What startled me is sort of the pace of change. Like this week is different than last week, and I don't
Mm-hmm.
mean that metaphorically.
Mm.
This week we, have actually paid for a one of those tools that allows you to try to detect and are getting involved in a cat and mouse game that I didn't want to get involved with, not because I think we're going to win it, because I do not. I think we're going to lose it. But, to the degree that I'm sort of responsible, I want to at least ask questions of people who are turning in papers that look like they've been substantially created using those tools, not because I object to people getting help, and especially I don't object to it if their first language isn't English. I really think there's a positive to be had there. There's a democratizing impact or potential of these tools to help people whose first language isn't English, compete on the same playing field. But the proportion of references that are inaccurate or hallucinated is very, very high.
Mm.
And that's the thing that is got consuming most of my attention now. And we saw and are seeing a wave of AI generated letters to the editor. And one day we saw letters from a person who wrote a letter about like I forget exactly what the domains were, but unrelated domains. Like the person wrote something about foot infections. The same day he wrote a letter to us about joint replacements, and it turns out we discovered that he wrote, that week, to a journal about pancreatic fistulas, to some general surgery journal. And it seems unlikely that one person would have the expertise in all of those areas.
Right.
And so this person is looking for a lot of quick, low value publications, which again, I don't really care if the machine helped him to ask good questions about it. I don't care if he's a general surgeon, a pancreatic surgeon, a foot surgeon, a veterinarian, a butterfly collector. It doesn't matter to me. If he's asking good questions, it's good questions. But the problem is a lot of these references are hallucinated. I don't have the time in my day or the love in my heart to run those to ground. And so this is sort of becoming a mess. At this point, I would characterize some of this as sort of naive misapplication of a tool that people don't think too carefully about, kind of along the lines of what you were saying about preprints before. Some of it's sort of frank misconduct. And I guess what I'd say is there's always been self-serving researchers. What's changed is that these tools are now enabling those values at scale.
Mm-hmm.
And making it a little worse is that they're kind of, the proponents, what you would call the utopians, I think, Kent, are kind of valorizing these values that I don't think are so good by using virtuous sounding terms like open and transparent and accessible, and in ways that don't meet the plain sense meaning of the words, at least to me.
Mm-hmm.
I don't want to get overly philosophical, but so it's I think these are misapplications. I went to a podcast. I never go, not podcast, a webinar of somebody who is sharing a new tool that seemed like it would allow somebody to create from whole cloth of paper, including the data. I mean, it really looked like it was teed up, ready to sort of promote misconduct at scale. And so I asked a question, at that webinar, like, I'm not sure exactly how I phrased it, but it was something like, "What the F?" And 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 his response was, this is not a quote, but it's very close. He said, these tools are like a knife. It's a tool. You can use it to make a delicious meal or to do bad things. That was his line.
Yeah.
He says it'll make good researchers better and bad ones worse. And I guess I just fundamentally don't agree.
That's
there's a
shocking.
lot of sloppy rhetoric being used to
Yeah.
peddle
Right. So
sloppy
that's
tech.
right. So that's what I mean by using terms to sort of valorize something that, or obscure the
Right.
function of something that
Right.
doesn't have a virtuous function.
Jedi mind trick. Bring me a taco.
Yeah, bring me a taco indeed.
So, Joy, do you have questions for Seth?
I wanted to ask you about how many journals do you read? What's within the scope? You mentioned earlier that there's, now up to maybe 300 journals for an audience of maybe 35,000.
Yeah.
What's the normal amount of titles to peruse for somebody in your profession?
Yeah. I don't think this is a terrible thing for a journal editor to say, but I don't think it's a good use of anybody's time to read most journals cover to cover.
Mm-hmm.
Right. I think that anybody who tells you he or she is reading, many journals cover to cover, I think is engaged in some kind of a performative behavior. So I'm not going to do that. What I do is I get the table of contents from journals that I think do a nice job. And I try to scan the table of contents for content that, pertains. I stopped doing surgery a few years ago. But people ask me this question a lot, when I go and do lecturing then and now. And, I think, when I was doing clinical surgery, I would try to read the table of contents of the leading general interest journals, which there are a couple in our specialty, and then a subspecialty journal. And I would try to do the same for, a general interest medical title in case grandma had a question, not because I was going to become an expert in anything to do with the colon or the heart. But, I think if it's in JAMA, I'm curious to just see what JAMA is doing, and I'll read one out of every, I don't know, 50 of those, articles, or less probably, because it just doesn't pertain. But I'll probably, I will look at the table of contents of the other general interest journals. I'll probably read a few of them each month, a few of the articles each month. And my job calls for a lot of reading. I would suspect that the typical person may be doing less than that.
Yeah. Okay. Well, I'd hate to cut it short, but we do have to move on to discoveries of the week so we can make sure we get Seth's discovery of the weekend. All right, Seth, did you have a discovery of the week this week?
Well, this was the part of the interview I tried to prepare for, because I saw when you did this with the with that wonderful editor of Annals of Internal Medicine, and it looked like fun, so I didn't want to come empty-handed. And so I went out to go find a discovery of the week. So the place I went to go look was, we have a section in our journal called Editor's Spotlight Take 5. So that's the part of our journal where I pick out what I think is the article that has the broadest general interest. So I thought, oh, for sure, I'm going to find a discovery there. And I got sucked into this rabbit hole where it was this little meta thing where I stopped looking at the discoveries and I realized that I was looking at my biases. And so my discovery of the week is, the degree to which my biases, influence my decision-making here. And, they say that self-knowledge is always bad news. And this was a great example of that, so my big bias that came through in the article. So I went back over a couple of years of these, as part of, to try to be prepared for your question. And I found that about half, so this was not just a bias, this was almost like a fetish. So about half of the articles that I covered in that section were negative, no difference, or surprising findings, or findings that suggest we do less surgery, not more.
So you're trying to put your readers out of jobs?
Kind of, and, because I guess, I came into this role. I remember we talked before about the idea that I had ideas at the beginning that, I thought I could do different. And, one of them was, I thought that surgical journals tended to promote the idea that more surgery is a good thing, that what surgeons do is generally good, is generally effective. And I had questions about the degree to which that was true. And, I guess I've sort of been an enthusiast of trying to find those studies that don't follow that narrative. And what I didn't realize is sort of how much airtime I was giving them. So it seems like about half of the stuff that I cover in the high visibility venue in our journal, is either negative, no difference, unexpected, or telling us to do less intervention rather than more. So my discovery of the week was, after 13 years, my biases have gotten worse, not better.
Okay. That's great. I love it. I love it. Joy, do you have one?
I do. I learned something from Heather Cox Richardson the other day. So she's a historian who has a really great newsletter and podcast where she's kind of explaining what's going on in the world based through her lens as a historian. And just as an aside, I don't even remember what she was talking about, but she mentioned the word deadline. And so I learned the origin of the word deadline, which was it was
Civil War term.
Civil War term, right? If you crossed a line, then you would get shot. And then over the years,
that's how we handle it at CORR. How do you handle it at your job?
Well, but then, so I looked into it a little bit more, because it went into printing, as that's the part that's outside the line won't get printed on physical printing presses. And so then it turned into the last time that you could turn something in before it could make the printing press. So I didn't know that it went from Civil War prisoners being shot to when you can get your paper in to make an issue.
I'm glad it got more benign.
Yeah.
I don't think we'd be here, Joy, because I know I've missed some deadlines. So, in fact, I missed the deadline for this discovery of the week, so I'm going to have to preview mine. For now, I will try to wear the same shirt and put mine in later. But if so, if you stayed for a minute longer, you'll hear my discovery of the week, which I anticipate will be my attendance at a cow plop contest this coming weekend in Vermont. And I'm going to be particularly focused on the judging criteria. I don't know if it's depth, consistency, targeting, um,
Distance.
distance, maybe. I don't know. I just don't know. Yeah, weight. I don't know. It's going to be interesting. So, but apparently in this town, it's the famous cow plop contest that everybody looks forward to, and that's going to be my discovery of the week. So this is an anticipatory discovery of the week because we are recording this before the weekend, and so for those of you who had a great Indigenous Peoples Columbus Day weekend, you know what I was doing, and I'll update you at some future point about this discovery to come. So even just, I guess my discovery was that discovered I was going to see a cow plop contest. How about that?
Yeah.
I hope this is no comment on the quality or content of the interview you just performed.
You win, Seth. Not at all. So thank you for joining us. We really appreciate it. And thanks for preparing the discovery of the week. And we'll have this up soon. And thanks.
Yeah. Thanks so much, Seth. That was
It was
enlightening.
such fun. Oh gosh, back at you. Thank you.
Take care. Well, I hope you enjoyed that conversation with Seth. He was so much fun to talk to, and we learned a lot. And we ended on a bit of a cliffhanger. So now we're doing the recap, Kent.
I know.
What happened with your discovery of the week?
Right.
Where
So my
did you
discovery
go and
was
what
that
did
I
you
was,
do?
yeah, it was that I was attending a cow plop contest, and then we went to see it, and we went up to Cider Days. I think it was in Arlington, Vermont, and it was a very quaint little town festival with, what you'd expect: a lot of apples and soaps and um, fried dough and animals and all of that. So I went to
Was
the
there a
information booth.
was there
Hmm?
a Bob Newhart lookalike contest going on in the background? Daryl
No,
and
there was a Daryl. There might have been a Daryl contest going on without my knowledge because it certainly looked like it could have been. But yeah, very cute and lots of kids running around and lots of dogs, lots of dogs. One really cute one named Wookie, which was he looked like a Wookie. He was a puppy and he was very, very cute being carried around. But anyhow, but I had to learn about the cow plop contest because it wasn't obvious where to go to find out about it. So I went to an information booth, and a very friendly lady with a very chipper British accent informed me that the way the cow plop contest works is that you buy a grid, a 3 foot by 3 foot grid that's pre-painted on a field and numbered like a bingo card, and one cow is put out into the field, and when the cow and you buy as many as you want, and they're $10 or $20 a piece. And then when the cow drops, game over, and whoever owns that square wins the pot. And so I didn't go observe it because it didn't sound all that exciting. But I now know how it works. So it's kind of a
wait. So is there okay? I'm trying to use my imagination here.
uh-huh.
So it's a 3 foot by 3 foot square.
Each
Each
square is
one.
3 foot by 3 foot, and there's
Right.
dozens of them.
And you can get dozens of them. And how many cows are
One
playing
cow.
bingo at a time?
One cow is dictating the winner.
Okay. All
Yeah.
right.
Yeah, and I didn't get into whether there's if it does a, right in the middle of four squares, and it's right on it's like the four corners
Yeah.
of in the west, and it's like how do you split the pot four ways, or if it straddles two, or I mean, I'm sure there are complications, and there are probably families have been destroyed by this, I'm sure,
I
at some
bet.
point. Yeah, because
Yeah.
it's a classic up there, but I didn't go see it. It seemed like it sold out almost immediately. It was like people were buying. It's just and then the cow. I don't know. It's obviously blissfully unaware of what it's doing. But that's the end of the story, so to speak.
All right. Well, now we know what that is, and I look forward to next year's
Yeah,
competition.
I do too.
What, you
It's
can
quite,
get ready
I hope the
a little
cow's in
earlier.
training. Hope the
Yeah.
cow's in training right now. So anyhow, so thanks for tuning in. Thanks to our friends at Provoke the Truth for the music. And as always, let us know what you think. You can reach us at disruptedscience@gmail.com, and we will see you next week.